actually collect this data, there's a couple of different ways, depending on whether you sort of ask people in real time, what are you feeling, or what emotions, and give them that list or whatever, or retrospectively, how did you feel yesterday or last week, or whatever. So with respect to real time, there's a couple of methods that have found traction in the literature, and truthfully, I don't remember the distinction between them very well right now, but they both deal with kind of pinging somebody. Of course, with smartphones now, it's much easier. You have your smartphone apps, and they can buzz and tell you, at that moment you're supposed to record what you're feeling at the time, and probably what you're doing at the time, and who you're with, and what the conditions are. Well, so as you can imagine, that will give you probably pretty good data on the truth, to the extent people are willing to report it or are able to report it. But it's also pretty intrusive and fairly demanding on the respondent. So other scholars, including Nobel Prize winner Kahneman, has evolved the day reconstruction method and basically get people to reconstruct the previous day in such a salient way that they believe that this also is pretty accurate with respect to recovering people's feelings during that day. But I think they would also admit that perhaps not as reliable as the real time. But as we know in our survey methods class, it's a constant set of trade-offs between burden on the respondent and quality of the data. So this might be a reasonable compromise way of collecting the data. Then just a brief look at what influences subjective well-being. This again is from the general literature on subjective well-being, so you might be wondering what improves our well-being or what degrades it. And again, you immediately come up with all these questions. Do you need short-term or long-term? It can make a difference. Do you need our general well-being, or there's a bunch of domains that have evolved in the literature, like health or social relationships or whatever. Some have now added transportation as a domain. Are we talking about well-being as a personality trait or as a temporary state of being? But just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the findings that have been uncovered for long-term general measures of well-being, pretty common to find that there's personality influence on your sense of well-being, and at least by one study, that accounts for 50% of the variation across people in well-being measures or ratings. So some people are just sunnier personalities, more positively predisposed, and that can account for a lot. And the rest then, presumably the other 50% of variation is more dependent on my state, the life circumstances. But you may have seen in the popular media discussions of something called a set point, where if you're genetically a positive and happy-oriented person, then even if something sad happens in your life, that will diminish your quality of life or your subjective well-being, but usually only temporarily, and you kind of bounce back to your set point after a not too long period of time in many cases. But certainly income and, but as the thing says, more than income per se, it's, are you in a condition of poverty? Are you, unemployed but looking for work, discouraged, and so forth? So it's not necessarily low income. Lots of low income people that have very high well-being, but sort of how you feel that income. And then, of course, social relationships always on the list, except that, again, I wonder if we're not getting tautological here or circular, if we're measuring well-being with, social relationships as one of our explanatory variables, but also using it as a way of measuring the dependent variable that I think we can get into. People meaningful social relationships have score highly on the meaningful social relationship item, so that's not terribly true. But health, obviously, also relevant. So these are fairly logical, I'd say. All right, so turning to the transportation component here, it's interesting that this topic of well-being has now, hit the transportation literature, and so travel behavior researchers have been looking at it for some time now. Enough time that we have not one, not two, not three, but 4 review papers on transportation and well-being. So, you're late to the party here, in this short time frame, 2012 to 2014, we have these nice 4 review papers. And when I say 2.5 conceptual models, the one in light font here did not have a conceptual model in its paper, picture, so I drew a picture for them from their paper where they had a nice conceptual typology that I turned into a picture. And then we have a bonus model, so Dick Edema and his colleagues, even before these review papers came out, had a very nice conceptual model. So the next 3 slides are just flashing up the 3 conceptual models that I'm not going to talk about, and then I'll get to the one I am. But again, just to kind of show you, there's this one from the Edema et al. Paper in 2010. There's this one from Alexa Del Osk in 2012. And this is the one I created from the Reardon et al. Paper where they had this nice conceptual discussion of these relationships, and I just turned it into a diagram. And then this is the one I'll talk more about. This is by Jonas de Vos and colleagues. He was a visiting scholar with me at one point at UC Davis. Unfortunately, I'm not a co-author on this paper, but we did do some other things together. And this is a busy chart, and we won't pick it apart arrow by arrow, but a couple of things that are pertinent. And he's the only one I've seen that distinguishes short-term and long-term. And I think that Edema may have distinguished eudaimonic from hedonic, but Jonas is showing that eudaimonic tends to stretch over the long-term and the short-term. Hedonic tends to be more short-term. But in particular, what I liked about this was that he identified, more in the paper than comes through clearly here, 5 different ways in which transportation can influence subjective well-being. And, a number of those ways are ones that I've been doing research in for a while, and so it's nice to have them kind of called out separately. So that's what I want to turn to now. I'm superimposing over his diagram to make it easier to see, but these are the places that these 5 ways appear on his diagram. So the first 2 are experiences during travel and activities conducted while traveling. And I put those up together because, again, I think the boundary between them can be kind of blurry. Where do you draw the line? For example, scenery gazing or people watching. Is that just something I'm experiencing, the lovely scenery going by my window? Or is it an activity I'm conducting while traveling? Maybe in some respects it doesn't matter, but sometimes it might. And so, I've made the provisional distinction that an experience is something that happens to you without you even trying, whereas an activity is something that you deliberately do. Still, it's a blurry boundary, but, if I'm just got way ahead in my book, then I'm not really scenery gazing, right? But if I happen to glance out and, unconsciously just look up and see something, then that's an experience. Whereas if I deliberately look out the window for a while, that would be an activity. Anyway, again, it may not matter, but that's one way to distinguish. But these 2 can influence our well-being, and you can see that we're kind of floating from short-term to long-term as we go up the chart here. The third one is engagement and out-of-home activities. So this is our classic travel as a derived demand idea. Let's not lose track of the fact that maybe the most important thing travel does for us is allow us to participate in all these other activities that influence our well-being. So that's the fourth one is travel as an activity in its own right may itself contribute to our well-being, and we'll come back to that. And then the word motility, you may or may not have seen, that just means the potential to travel. So even just the very fact of being able to travel, whether I actually exercise it or not, can influence my well-being. So I want to try to look at these one by one. Again, I'll necessarily have to hasten over all 5 of them, but to at least dip into each one of them. The first thing to say about experiences while traveling is, it should go without saying, but I found myself confusing it with the experience of travel or the travel experience. And so there are literatures on both of these, and so it's kind of important to keep in mind that the experience of travel or the travel experience might be a summary judgment about a trip or a type of trip that could itself be a function of all 5 of these things, right, or at least several of the 5. And so I think of the travel experience as a summary judgment, not as one of the 5, but it's certainly different from specific experiences that occur to me while I travel. So anyway, said that. And among the 5 components that we just talked about, some of those components might moderate the influence of others of them on some summary measure of my travel experience. For example, if I love traveling for its own sake, then maybe I'm not as bothered by a negative event that happens on the trip, and so forth. So that's number one. But having made that distinction, there's plenty of literature on experiences while traveling. It's just not sort of grouped under that single classification. But if you look at crowding, that's an experience, congestion, etc. All of these are in effect looking at influence on our well-being. And I didn't find very many, really only one, that looked at the influence of unusual events while traveling. Well, you can imagine why. We didn't focus on what usually happens. But there's this very interesting article that talks about unusual events. Somebody, a fight breaks out on a train or something. So anyway, just a flavor again of what's out there. Let's turn to number two, the activities conducted while traveling. This is an area that's seen a lot of recent interest, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is that advances in information technology have made lots more activities feasible that didn't used to be feasible while traveling. And accompanying that is the fact that almost all of us are equipped with devices that enable us to engage in this broad new set of activities. It's important to realize that there could be implications for evaluation of travel time savings. So the cost-benefit analysis is predicated on being able to put a dollar value on every moment, literally every second of travel time saved by some infrastructure improvement or other improvement. The dollar valuation that's put on those travel time savings is usually, from what I've read, something like 80% of the evaluated benefit of a new improvement. Well, what if, by the fact that I can use my travel time productively, I don't get as much out of saving travel time as I used to, then maybe that traditional way of valuing travel time savings is overestimating or overcounting the benefit of an improvement that would save travel time. This is not a new idea. You can find traces of it back in Gary Becker's seminal first article on the allocation of time model, and later points in the literature. And what's brought it to the forefront now is can it help transit have a competitive advantage over the car? The fact that a transit trip is usually slower or takes longer than a comparable car trip, but if I can use the time productively, maybe I would prefer a longer trip on transit over a shorter one in the car. And now, of course, with autonomous vehicles right around the corner, we're all wondering, okay, now that I can just sit in the car and have it drive me around wherever I want to, I may not need to waste the time at all. Maybe I can use that time just as productively as if I were somewhere else. So what will that do to travel behavior? So, it appears in a number of places. There's several very nice conceptual papers that Glenn Lyons and his colleagues have done. There's several very nice empirical observation papers on who does what and how much they do it. There are several stated preference studies on how the value of travel time savings might be affected by travel multitasking. And I put Boardman and Lyons in a separate parenthetical comment because it's not a stated preference study, a new study of its own. It's actually a review of the evidence with respect to how value of travel time savings might be influenced by ICT in particular. So it's just out very recently in the Journal of Transportation, and highly recommend it as another gateway into this particular issue. And then Alex Malikan, who's not here, but Giovanni and he and I are putting together a couple of papers where we've actually collected data and revealed preference, mode choice models, accounting for the influence of the ability to multitask. So those are now, one of them submitted, the other one submitted to TRB, and will shortly go into the journal submission. So that's kind of fun. Okay, that's kind of what's out there with respect to activities conducted while traveling, the motivation for why we're interested in it, how we demonstrated an impact on well-being. Well, again, these short-term trip-oriented measures of well-being, we have seen evidence that things like talking to other people or listening to music, audio, scenery gazing have positive influence on various measures of well-being with respect to that trip or something like that. Interestingly, several studies, including one of my own and the mode choice model work that I just alluded to, entertainment, the ability to entertain ourselves while traveling should improve our well-being. Why would that, make our well-being worse? And we eventually concluded, and were relieved to find that these other scholars who found similarly counterintuitive results have the same explanation, and that is that we're talking about the opposite direction of causality. That basically when my trip is distasteful or burdensome in some way, I'm more likely to entertain myself to try to ameliorate the negative aspects of the trip. So it's the negative well-being associated with the trip that makes me more likely to entertain myself, not the other way around, that the entertainment is affecting the well-being of the trip. So one example among many of kind of pitfalls that can be associated with studying this, got to get the causality straight, and we'll see that again shortly. Edema et al. Make the point that another reason why there might be a disconnection here is that when we're engaging in activities while traveling, we might be doing it to influence other well-being domains, not travel per se. So in other words, I may be studying my homework or studying for class on my journey into school. I'm not doing that to make the trip better particularly. I'm doing it to improve my ultimate eudaimonic well-being or whatever. So trying to find a connection from activities while traveling to the trip related well-being may be, a lost cause if I'm doing those activities for some entirely different reason. So another kind of challenge associated with it. Moving right along to the third one, we have engagement in out-of-home activities, and here the evidence is pretty clear that engagement with out-of-home activities is associated with higher levels of well-being. So again, it's sort of satisfying that what we spend our lives studying, is improving people's well-being because, travel is enabling them to do these various things out of home. But some of the things I noticed when I was looking at, not so much the ones I cited on the previous page because those were the better ones, but I was looking at a lot of studies and finding, again, scratching my head saying, boy, these are pretty simple analyses. They're only doing crosstabs of some well-being measure against some out-of-home, activity measure. Shouldn't we be controlling for all these other variables? And many times they weren't. But even in some of the better studies, again, we had a problem of direction of causality, where, they were implying or outright saying that the more we engage in activities out of home, that causes our well-being to be higher. Well, to me, it's very likely the other way around. The more happy, well-adjusted, content, etc. I am with my life, the more motivation I have to get out and do things, the more energy I have, or the more inclination I have to be around people. I mean, we've all heard of depressed people who, it's a vicious cycle. The more depressed they are, the less they want to be with other people, and the less they're with other people, the less chance they have to get pulled out of their depression. And so that's the opposite direction of causality. From more out-of-home activities leads me to have higher well-being. What if it's the other way around? So again, we can be overestimating the influence of travel on allowing us to do these out-of-home activities and the influence in turn on well-being if we don't get that right. And then we have the subtle selection bias. So one of the studies said, in effect, the out-of-home activities had much lower pain levels, so they were measuring stress and pain or whatever and comparing the stress and pain associated, self-reported, people would report stress and pain associated with out-of-home activities and in-home activities. And the study was saying, oh, look, on average, the stress and pain associated with out-of-home activities is lower than that with in-home activities. And they were kind of making the case that, again, travel is helping people to get out and do things where that lowers their stress and their pain. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, you're not controlling for the kinds of activities that you're going to do at home versus outside. I'm thinking there's a selection bias in what I'm doing out of home. I'm not going to do like a personal care activity they were in particular pointing to. I'm like, okay, if I'm giving myself an insulin injection, that's going to be painful or whatever, I'm going to do that at home, not out of home. And so there's a selection bias in that I'm probably going to do the painful, more stressful personal care activities at home, not out of home. So you can't compare apples to oranges. You need to control for what type of activity we're talking about. So again, I just thought issues that I think there's room for improvement in trying to tease out what impact out-of-home activities have on our well-being, or vice versa. And the other issue was the effect side is seldom discussed, so we're very happy to get a significant coefficient in the model that says more of this leads to higher well-being, but how much more of that leads to how much higher, hardly ever mentioned. So again, a plea for looking at the sizes of the effects, not just statistical significance. But, you know, given the evidence that it seems like out-of-home activities lead us to higher well-being, to the extent that is true, it does raise the question then, you know, we've got a little bit of a policy dilemma to the extent that we feel like more travel is less sustainable, you know, and so we have all these policies that are trying to discourage travel, like maybe raising the price of travel in some way through gas prices or congestion pricing or whatever. And of course your immediate reaction is, yeah, but that's automobile travel. Yeah, but when people don't have many other options besides that, and you make it harder for them to use their automobile, are we reducing their well-being overall? And so that raises these questions. Can we achieve the same benefits of this out-of-home activity engagement with more sustainable modes? Does it have to be the car that is going to, you know, improve our quality of life by allowing us to engage in all these various activities? Sometimes maybe yes. So again, I think we need to think about the impact on well-being of, you know, trying to get people out of their cars when that may mean not making the trip at all. But also, you know, we